A little black girl offers to pay for a stranger's coffee and unknowingly shatters a man's entire reality. Her name, her smile, her eyes. They match the woman he lost 7 years ago. In that moment, everything unravels: secrets, bloodlines, and a buried crime no one was meant to find. What happens next will shake a family, a legacy, and the lie of who gets to belong. If this moment grabs you, stay with us and tell us gently, where in the world are you watching from? And is it morning, afternoon, or night where you are? It was the kind of morning that carried the quiet weight of early October. The air was just cold enough to push folks into jackets, but not cold enough to see your breath. Inside Ridgeway Cafe, the heater hummed gently behind the clinking of ceramic mugs and the soft shuffle of tired feet on tile. It was the kind of place you'd walk into out of routine, not adventure, where the coffee was strong, the muffins a bit dry, and no one ever asked you where you were coming from. Dorothy Clark, 7 years old, stood on her tiptoes to see over the bakery case. Her hands were clean, her jacket zipped all the way up, and her face, well, her face was one of those faces that made strangers soften without realizing it. Light brown skin hair pulled back in a half-twist, dark eyes that watched everything like she was trying to memorize the world before it forgot her. She clutched 3 $1 bills in her palm, folded neatly but warm from her grip. Her mother had no idea she'd left the apartment that morning. Dorothy had waited until Eunice was in the shower before slipping out, coat-zipped shoes double-knotted, mission clear. The woman behind the counter, middle-aged and half-awake, smiled vaguely. Dorothy pointed to a blueberry muffin behind the glass. "Just one, please. For my mom," she said. Her voice was soft but certain, like this was something she did every Saturday. At the front of the line, a man in a charcoal wool coat was waiting on the card reader to work. Tall, maybe late 40s, early 50s, clean-shaven, tired eyes, expensive haircut that needed trimming. His name was Nathan Graham, though in that moment no one in the cafe would have recognized him, not as the founder of a billion-dollar tech company, not as the man who had once graced the cover of business magazines that sat dusty in waiting rooms, not as the man who had lost a woman named Tiffany Clark almost 7 years ago, and with her a piece of himself he had never managed to replace. The register beeped, declined. Nathan frowned slightly, reached into his coat, then muttered, "Damn, wallet's in the car." The barista smiled awkward. "I can set it aside." But before she could finish, Dorothy stepped forward and held out her little hand with the money folded inside. "I have $3. You can use mine," she said, offering it with both palms like it was a treasure. Nathan blinked. The girl looked up at him with an expression so open, so impossibly kind, it stopped him cold. Her eyes weren't just familiar, they were haunting. Round, dark, a little too serious for a child. Her smile, though, it tugged at something deep in his gut. It was crooked on one side. Not by much. Just enough. He crouched down almost without thinking. "Are you sure?" he asked. "That's a lot of money." Dorothy nodded. "It's okay. You looked like you needed coffee more than me." He laughed softly, shook his head. "Thank you. What's your name?" She looked at him, squarely proud of herself. "Dorothy. Dorothy Clark." The words didn't hit right away. They landed slowly, heavily, like snow on the roof before it cracks. Nathan went still. The sounds in the cafe dulled. The name clawed its way through memory, through years of grief and silence. Clark. His eyes dropped to her hands. On her wrist was a cheap plastic bracelet with the name Dorothy drawn in glitter pen. Her fingers had the same shape as Tiffany's. So did her chin. So did the tilt of her head when she waited for someone to speak. He stood up too quickly and nearly spilled the coffee the barista had passed over. She watched him with mild curiosity, the way people do when they know something small just happened, but not how big it really is. "Thank you, Dorothy," he said. His voice had tightened. "That was very kind." "You're welcome," she answered simply and walked back toward the window to wait for her muffin. Nathan stared at her for a moment longer, then stepped outside with his coffee untouched. He didn't make it to his car right away. Instead, he stood beside it, coffee steaming in his hand, eyes wide open, but focused on nothing in particular. The sidewalk blurred with movement, people walking, dogs, cars passing, but he was still. His heart was thudding fast and deep. 7 years. That's how long it had been since Tiffany had disappeared. One night she was there in his bed in his arms, the next gone. A note, a voicemail, then silence. She had been pregnant, and he had looked. Hired private investigators, tracked down hospitals, dug into records, but no body, no birth certificate, nothing. He had grieved, assumed the worst, had let himself believe eventually that the child didn't make it or never existed. But that child had a name: Dorothy Clark. He blinked hard and reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone with a hand that was suddenly unsteady. He tapped a contact. "Miranda," he said when the line picked up. "I need you to look up something. Urgent." Her voice crisp as always. "What's going on? Find me everything you can on Tiffany Clark. Birth records, missing persons, hospital admissions, especially anything from around 7 years ago, and see if there's any record for a child named Dorothy Clark." There was a pause. "You think I don't know what I think yet?" Nathan said, then paused, exhaling. "Just look." He hung up before she could ask more. Back inside the cafe, Dorothy accepted the warm muffin with a polite thank you and walked out, her small backpack bouncing slightly as she headed back down the sidewalk. She didn't look back. Nathan watched her go, watched her walk alone with the quiet confidence of a child used to doing things herself. He didn't follow. Not yet. But he made note of the direction, of the red jacket, of the way she paused to help a woman struggling with a newspaper stand. She was kind, clearly, thoughtful, careful, too much like Tiffany. He opened the car door but didn't get in, just stood there gripping the top of the frame, coffee forgotten. His mind was racing, but beneath the rush was something heavier, the kind of grief that only stirred when you realized you had buried the wrong version of a truth. If Dorothy was Tiffany's daughter, that meant Tiffany had carried the pregnancy to term. That meant she'd survived longer than he thought. That meant someone, possibly many people, had helped her disappear. And if the math lined up, if the age matched, and if this child was his, he closed his eyes. He needed to know. Later that day, after pacing his office for over an hour and fielding one unsatisfying update after another from Miranda, Nathan Graham finally stood still. The silence was heavier than before, the kind that made the air feel too thick to breathe. Something inside him had shifted the moment that little girl had said her name, Dorothy Clark, and he couldn't unhear it. He had stared at that name in his head until it began to mean something different. Not just a coincidence, not a ghost of memory. A thread, a direction. He wasn't the kind of man who chased shadows. But this didn't feel like a shadow. It felt like a truth breaking the surface. He returned to Ridgeway Cafe, hoping Dorothy might pass by again, though he knew it was unlikely. He wasn't there to stalk a child, he told himself that more than once. He was there to find someone who could answer the question boiling inside him. When the cafe manager mentioned that the little girl's mother worked at a diner nearby, something clicked. A small place called Edna's 2 blocks south. Nathan didn't thank the man. He was already walking out the door. Edna's looked like it hadn't changed since the early 80s. Beige vinyl booths, laminated menus, a small counter with chipped stools, and a chalkboard listing the lunch special meatloaf and creamed corn. There were maybe 6 customers inside, all local regulars, all older. Some read newspapers, others sipped coffee with their backs to the room like they did every afternoon of every week. The kind of place that knew how to forget new faces. She was behind the counter drying a mug. Her name tag said Gerda. She wore a plain gray uniform and white sneakers, the kind nurses wore in hospitals. Her face didn't give anything away. Strong jaw, deep-set eyes, an expression so composed it felt like a mask carved from lived experience. But something in her posture made Nathan certain. She wasn't just a server. She was Dorothy's protector. He took a seat at the counter. She walked over, wiped the surface in front of him with a damp cloth, and nodded once. "Coffee?" she asked flatly. Her voice was lower than he expected, steady, even a voice that had said no 1,000 times and would say it again if needed. "Yes, thanks," Nathan replied. He waited until she set the mug down and turned to leave. "You're Dorothy's mother." She paused, but didn't flinch. Turning back, she gave a small nod. "I take care of her. She helped me this morning," Nathan said carefully. "Paid for my coffee. Smart kid." "Sweet." Gerda gave a tired half smile, not quite meeting his eyes. "Always got more kindness than sense." The counter fell into silence. Nathan took a sip, though the coffee scalded his tongue. He set the mug down, his hand steadying itself against the ceramic. "I used to know someone named Clark, Tiffany Clark." Gerda didn't blink. She folded the cloth slowly, deliberately. "Lots of Clarks. She had a baby. Around 7 years ago." He continued watching her. Then she disappeared. For a second, something moved in her face, a flicker, like a ripple on water. But then it was gone. "Sorry to hear that," she said, her tone unchanged. Nathan let out a breath. Not anger, not yet, just the throb of being pushed out of something that mattered. He leaned in slightly. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to understand. Gerda looked at him fully now. Not hostile, not defensive, but firm. Understand what? That a child's being raised in peace, fed, loved, sheltered, or that someone who didn't raise her suddenly wants to know where she came from. That's not fair, he said more quietly. I didn't abandon Tiffany. I didn't even know. Didn't know what? That people like her disappear when they're inconvenient, that a scared girl carrying the wrong man's baby just vanishes, and no one asks why. Her voice didn't rise, but her words cut deeper than if they had. Around them, two older men in a booth looked over briefly, then returned to their coffee. Nathan felt something shift in his gut. This wasn't just a woman protecting a child. This was someone who'd survived enough to know exactly how the world worked and who it worked for. He swallowed hard. I don't want to take her. I just want to know. Gerda tilted her head, studying him. You think knowing makes you a father, or that a child needs to be connected to power to be safe. Nathan looked down, exhaled through his nose. I think she deserves to know the truth. That's all. And what happens after that press lawyer's blood tests? You think you're ready for all that, because if you open that door, you can't close it. Not without hurting her. There was no malice in her voice, just clarity. A warning, not a threat. Nathan felt the heat rise behind his eyes, but held it in. Gerda didn't flinch. She had seen that look before on cops, on caseworkers, on fathers who showed up late and expected forgiveness. If there's anything she needs, he began, she needs stability, and she has it. You want to help, then leave her be. Nathan didn't answer. The door behind him opened with a jingle. A young black woman entered, glanced at Gerda, then at Nathan with a flicker of something unreadable. Not suspicion, not curiosity, more like knowing. She didn't stay. As Nathan stood to leave, he reached into his wallet and set down a 20. Gerda pushed it back. She already paid for your coffee this morning. That debt's settled. He nodded, understanding more than he wanted to. Thank you for the coffee. Gerda said nothing. She was already turning back to the counter, already pouring for the next customer like nothing had passed between them. Nathan stepped outside into the gray afternoon. He didn't feel better. He didn't feel closer to the truth. But he understood something deeper than he had before, that the past wasn't buried. It was alive, protected, and if he wanted answers, he would have to earn them. That night after closing time, and after Dorothy had long fallen asleep with a half-read picture book on her chest, Gerda climbed the attic stairs with a slowness that wasn't entirely from age. Every step creaked under her weight, but it wasn't her body that felt heavy. It was memory. She hadn't been up here in years. Not since the last time Dorothy had asked too many questions, not since Gerda had almost opened the box but stopped herself because the past, once stirred, never stayed quiet. The attic was low-roofed, full of insulation dust and the sour smell of forgotten things. She didn't turn the light on. She didn't need to. She moved with the certainty of someone who had memorized every corner of this hidden room. Under an old tarp and a stack of broken-down baby gear, she found it. A square metal box scratched and faded, the lock long since rusted. She sat cross-legged on the floor like a girl, the cold creeping into her bones as she slid the lid open. Inside, everything was just as she had left it. There was the photograph, Tiffany sitting on the edge of a low bed, one hand resting on the swell of her pregnant belly. She looked exhausted but proud, her eyes swollen from crying, but her mouth curved into a crooked smile. She wore a borrowed nightgown, her hair pulled back in a way that showed off her high cheekbones and the small scar on her chin. Gerda stared at the photo for a long time before setting it aside. Then came the letter, still folded carefully, the paper soft and thinning at the edges. She had read it so many times it had become part of her bloodstream, but tonight she unfolded it again, as if Tiffany's voice could still reach her through the ink. Dear Eunice, it began, though the rest was anything but formal. If anything happens, you know what to do. I don't want her to grow up in shadows. But if it comes to it, you raise her. And you don't tell him. Not until she's old enough to decide what he means to her. Gerda swallowed hard. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried for Tiffany in years. But something in her chest twisted sharp and unrelenting. She touched the baby bracelet next. A pink hospital band with the name Dorothy written in Sharpie, the letters starting to fade. Underneath it was the torn hospital discharge sheet. No doctor's signature, no official file. It had been a home birth, if one could call it that, a desperate delivery in a rented one-room apartment behind a boarded-up nail salon. No anesthesia, no medical records, just towels, boiling water, and Gerda's trembling hands. Tiffany had gone into labor 2 weeks early. Gerda had tried to get help, but they were already hiding. The clinic wouldn't touch them without papers, and Tiffany had made her promise no hospitals, no names. She had screamed through every contraction, biting down on a wooden spoon so the neighbors wouldn't call the police. When Dorothy finally came out silent and bluish, Tiffany had panicked. It was Gerda who cleared her lungs, who slapped her back until the child screamed her first breath, clawing its way out like she already knew the world might not want her. And then Tiffany, pale and soaked in sweat, had said over and over, "She's mine. Don't let them take her." But they had taken her anyway. Not the baby, not physically. But they had stolen what kind of life she could have had. Tiffany had once been a promising sophomore at a private college studying sociology, passionate about racial justice, brilliant in debates. She had dreams of becoming a public defender until she got pregnant, until the wrong man found out. Her father, Senator Hartford, didn't beat around the bush. He sent aides, doctors, a non-disclosure agreement. When Tiffany refused to terminate the pregnancy, he had her committed. The institution was private, expensive, and built to erase mistakes. That was where Eunice had met her. Back then, she was Nurse Jenkins. She had worked there for 9 years, kept her head down, followed protocol. Until Tiffany. The girl wasn't crazy. She was terrified, drugged, shamed, and pregnant. And that changed everything. Eunice had seen what happened to girls like that. Ones who didn't bend, who refused the nice, quiet exits. She smuggled food notes, hope. And then one night she smuggled Tiffany herself out the back into a waiting cab. No plan beyond survival. That night, Eunice became Gerda Clark, and everything before that gone. Just like Tiffany would be not long after Dorothy was born. She hadn't died in some clean white hospital. She had bled out on a secondhand mattress while Gerda dialed a burner phone that no one answered. By the time the sun came up, her skin was cold, her lips blue. Her final breath had come sometime between the baby's first nap and Gerda washing the sheets. There was no funeral, no obituary, just a promise sealed in a whisper and locked in this metal box. Gerda looked down at her hands. The veins stood out like tree roots, her skin dry from dish soap and hard winters. She had kept Dorothy safe, loved, fed, schooled. She had taught her to read, to tie her shoes, to say please and thank you. But she had also taught her to be invisible, to speak when spoken to never give her last name to strangers. And yet, that morning, with nothing but innocence in her heart, Dorothy had said Dorothy Clark. And that name had cracked open everything. She held the bracelet tighter. There was no going back now. Nathan had seen her, heard her, connected her. He would not stop. And if he was truly Tiffany's man, if he had loved her the way she had said he did, then he deserved to know. Maybe. But Gerda couldn't ignore the other truth. Power had nearly destroyed that little girl once. Power had killed her mother. She would not let it take Dorothy too. The attic groaned slightly as she stood, knees stiff back, aching. She put everything back in the box and closed the lid gently. Not to forget, just to wait. She carried it down the stairs slowly, not bothering to dust off her hands. In the small hall closet behind winter coats and a broken vacuum, she slid the box into the shadows. Then she went to check on Dorothy, who was still asleep, one arm across her stuffed rabbit, her mouth open slightly. Gerda stood in the doorway, longer than she meant to, one hand pressed to her chest. This wasn't fear. Not exactly. This was something older, deeper, a knowing that the past always came back. And when it did, it never asked permission. 2 days later, Nathan sat alone in his office, blinds half drawn, the soft hum of air conditioning barely cutting through the silence that pressed in from all sides. The conversation with Gerda had looped in his mind like a cracked reel of film, grainy, fragmented, impossible to ignore. She had said little, but the way she looked at him, the way her voice hardened and then trembled when Dorothy's name came up, it told him everything he needed to know and nothing he could prove. He hadn't slept, not really. Every time he drifted off, it was Tiffany's voice he heard, and every time he woke, it was Dorothy's face that greeted him behind closed eyes. He pressed the intercom fingers, tapping rhythmically on his desk. "Miranda, get me Daniel Reyes. I want a full background check. Birth records, guardianship filings, medical history. Anything and everything we can find on Dorothy Clark. Keep it off the books." A brief pause, then Miranda's calm voice. "I've already started. I figured you would." The next morning, Daniel Reyes arrived. He was still the same worn leather jacket, pressed slacks, and a no-nonsense air that made most people uncomfortable. But Nathan wasn't most people. Daniel had helped him dismantle corporate schemes that left trails in numbers and ink. Now he was asking him to trace something far more elusive, a life that shouldn't exist on paper, and one that had been quietly erased. Daniel laid out a series of photocopies and scans across the desk. Dorothy Clark, birth certificate filed 3 weeks late, flagged due to timing, but that happens with home births, especially in lower-income communities. No father listed. Mother named as Gerda Clark. Nathan leaned forward, brows furrowed. And Gerda Clark before that? "That's where it gets messy," Daniel replied, flipping over another sheet. "There's no record of a Gerda Clark existing before 7 years ago. No taxes, no employment, no social security history, nothing. But there is an Eunice Jenkins. She was a licensed practical nurse employed at Woodmere Institute private psych facility out in Sussex County. She disappeared around the same time Tiffany Clark did." Nathan exhaled slowly. "So she changed her name?" Daniel nodded. "Yes. And here's the kicker. I compared handwriting samples from hospital logs and intake forms. Same hand. She's our Gerda. She's been living under that name since shortly after Tiffany vanished." He pushed another paper across the table. It was a faded scan of Dorothy's birth certificate. The ink on the signature line looked rushed, slightly smudged. No hospital name, no attending physician, just a location handwritten, private residence. "There's no trace of a doctor or midwife involved," Daniel added. "It's either a home birth or something done without formal oversight. Could have been intentional, or they had no other option." Nathan stared at the paper. It felt surreal. This wasn't an abstract case anymore. This was his past clawing its way back into the present, one document at a time. Tiffany had been pregnant. She'd gone off the grid. And someone Eunice Jenkins, now Gerda, had made it her mission to keep that child hidden. What about Tiffany? Any official death certificate, hospital discharge, anything? Daniel shook his head. Nothing. She was admitted to Woodmere under a guardianship order. That file was sealed, but I found traces in insurance records. According to those, she was pregnant at the time of admission. There's no note of a birth, a discharge, or a death. Legally, she just disappears. Nathan's voice was tight. "Who signed the guardianship order?" "Still looking. The scanned version I pulled had the name redacted, but the initials matched someone high up. I need more time to confirm." Nathan nodded, but the tremor in his jaw betrayed his rising anger. This wasn't neglect. This was orchestration. Someone had deliberately removed Tiffany and everything connected to her from the system. Daniel flipped through another set of pages. Also found this. Payroll shifts at Woodmere. Several staff left around the same time. And there were quiet payments made to the facility from a private discretionary fund. Can't say from who yet, but the timing lines up with Tiffany's stay. Nathan sat back, absorbing the weight of what was being said. He looked down at a scanned image of Eunice Jenkins' ID badge, dark eyes, tired but gentle, a face that now wore the name Gerda Clark and bore the burden of another woman's child. Taped behind it was a blurry photocopy of a handwritten note. The ink was smeared, but the message pierced through, "Keep her safe. If they find her, they'll bury her too." Nathan held the paper without speaking. The silence was no longer empty. It was dense with the weight of understanding. Tiffany hadn't run away. She had been erased. Dorothy hadn't been abandoned. She had been protected. And Gerda Eunice had chosen to disappear rather than let that child be swallowed up by the same forces that had taken her mother. Finally, Nathan looked up, voice low but steady. "Keep digging. I want everything. Whoever approved that guardianship, whoever signed the checks, whoever vanished those files. We find them. We find the truth." Daniel stood and gathered his things. "We're getting close. But this isn't just about missing records anymore. Someone made sure this girl didn't exist. That's a hell of a thing to try and unwind." "Then we start pulling thread by thread," Nathan said. "If someone went to all this trouble, there's a reason. And I want to know what it is." Daniel nodded once left the folder and slipped out the door. Nathan remained the desk strewn with documents that told a story louder than words ever could. A child born into silence. A mother lost in paperwork. A nurse who became a ghost to keep a promise. And somewhere behind it all, a hand pulling strings that he was just beginning to see. He ran a hand through his hair. The lines on his face deepened with exhaustion and resolve. He picked up the birth certificate again, traced the edges with his thumb, then looked at the note, its warning clear, its meaning brutal. Keep her safe, because someone had wanted her gone. And that meant she mattered. That meant they both did. The truth wasn't clean. It never was. But it was out there. And now he had a direction. The following evening, Daniel Reyes returned to Nathan's office. This time, he looked more guarded, less like an investigator with questions, and more like a man holding a secret too large to carry for long. He didn't wait for pleasantries. He laid a thick manila envelope on the table between them, his hand resting on it for a beat too long before sliding it forward. Nathan picked it up with a calm that betrayed the churn in his gut. Something was different about Daniel's eyes. Not fear exactly, but something close to it, the expression of a man who had just walked through someone else's buried truth. "You need to see this for yourself," Daniel said quietly. Nathan opened the folder. The first page was an internal memo from a psychiatric facility, Woodmere. It had been heavily redacted, but not enough to hide the structure. The header included a case file number and Tiffany Clark's name. A note at the bottom of the page made his breath catch. Guardianship override kinship authorization under state confidentiality statute. He looked up. Kinship. Daniel nodded. Keep going. The next sheet was a scan of a guardianship consent form, handwritten, dated, and bearing an unmistakable signature. It was there in ink Senator Harold Hartford, the same man who championed family values in every campaign. The same man who shook Nathan's hand at a charity fundraiser 6 years ago talking about legacy. The same man whose eyes had passed right through him, never once revealing this truth, that Tiffany Clark had been his daughter. Nathan said nothing. He couldn't. The page blurred. He set it down and pushed the bridge of his nose, steadying himself against the tremor that wanted to rise in his voice. Daniel leaned forward, his voice low and grim. "There's more. I traced a payment trail. Hartford's discretionary funds made recurring transfers to Woodmere, small enough not to raise alarms, but consistent. Most went through third-party trusts. I also found internal staff logs from Woodmere, a nurse who left suddenly and was never contacted again. Her name was redacted, but the handwriting matches someone we're already familiar with." Eunice, Nathan whispered. Daniel nodded. She was there. The same week, Tiffany was listed as pregnant. And there's a note from a now-retired physician, unsigned but detailed. It refers to unusual directives surrounding a patient whose file was sealed under kinship law. Says he was pressured to withhold prenatal reports. The term used was sensitive family placement. Nathan stood and paced to the window. The city outside glowed with indifference. Lights blinked in office buildings where people stayed late for bonuses or ambition, not for truth. He felt sick. Tiffany hadn't just been abandoned. She had been owned, used, and discarded like a problem to be managed. He institutionalized his own daughter. Nathan said quietly, "Yes." And he made sure no one ever found her. Daniel replied. Nathan turned back toward the desk. But why was she a threat to his reputation? Because of her mother. Daniel met his eyes, the silence between them stretching. Finally, he said Tiffany's mother was never publicly named, but her original school forms listed race African American. It's been scrubbed from later files, but someone made a point to delete those indicators. Nathan's stomach twisted. It explained the whispers, the nervous laughter, the way Tiffany used to shrug when he asked about her family. He remembered how she avoided galas and fundraisers, never once letting him meet anyone from her childhood. All this time, she had been hiding a lineage that could destroy Hartford's political ambitions. Daniel pulled out another file. "There's one more thing. I found a campaign photo from 15 years ago. Hartford standing with a small group of supporters outside a library. Groundbreaking. Look here." He handed over the photo. Nathan squinted, then froze. Behind the senator, partly obscured by a podium, was a teenage girl. Her eyes were unmistakable. So was the curve of her jaw. Tiffany, maybe 16. Her name wasn't listed anywhere in the caption. No mention of a daughter. No family acknowledgement, just another face in the crowd buried. Nathan set the photo down. His hands were trembling now. He erased her, he said, not just from his family, from the world. He had the power to do it, Daniel said, and no one questioned it. The room fell quiet. Outside, the sky was turning the color of bruised steel. Inside, Nathan felt like something had broken loose inside him. Not a crack, but a shift. An opening he hadn't expected. He wasn't just grieving a woman he had loved. He was staring at the architecture that allowed her to be eliminated. The machinery of wealth, whiteness politics, and fear. "He's Dorothy's grandfather," Nathan murmured, "and he would have erased her too." Daniel didn't speak. He didn't need to. The truth was filling the room like smoke, undeniable, acrid real. Nathan lowered himself into the chair again. His throat was dry. His hands were cold. How many people had to help him do this enough to make it disappear? And scared enough to keep quiet. Nathan nodded slowly. Then it's our turn to make noise. He reached for the envelope again. It felt heavier this time, not just with paper, but with the weight of what had been stolen. A daughter's life, a mother's voice, a child's truth. This wasn't just personal anymore. This was systemic. And Nathan was no longer willing to stand on the sidelines of a story he had been written out of. It was time to write it back in. It happened on a Wednesday just after 4 in the afternoon. Gerda was chopping carrots in the kitchen, the radio humming softly in the background while Dorothy sat at the table coloring in a workbook. The routine was familiar, almost sacred. Nothing in the air suggested what was coming until the sharp sound of tires crunching gravel pulled Gerda's eyes toward the window. A government-issue sedan was idling at the curb, two strangers in business-casual attire stepping out with clipboards in hand, and a practiced sort of calm that made her stomach turn. She wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the door. "Miss Clark," the woman asked, showing her badge before Gerda even had time to respond. "We're with Child Protective Services. May we come in?" Gerda froze. Her fingers tightened around the doorknob, her heart hammering in her chest. Dorothy looked up from the table with wide eyes, sensing something had shifted. "Is there a problem?" Gerda asked, her voice even but laced with steel. The woman offered a sympathetic smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We received a report. An anonymous tip alleging that a minor is being housed here under questionable legal circumstances." Gerda let out a breath, sharp and slow. "That's ridiculous." The man beside her colleague interjected, his voice firmer. "We understand this might be distressing, ma'am, but we have to follow protocol. We need to speak to the child and review any documentation you have regarding guardianship." Dorothy came to Gerda's side and clung to her skirt. The girl didn't fully understand what was happening, but she felt the change in air pressure, the unease that came when something sacred was being invaded. Gerda turned to her. "Go to your room, baby. It's all right." Dorothy looked up at her hesitant, then nodded and walked slowly down the hall. The agent stepped inside, uninvited but unwavering. The woman scanned the room as if taking inventory. The man opened a folder, flipping through papers that seemed already prepared for confrontation. "We'll need to confirm Dorothy Clark's birth certificate, school enrollment, and any legal guardianship papers you may have," he said. Gerda went to the cabinet above the refrigerator and pulled down a worn envelope. Inside were the documents she'd kept protected all these years, the delayed birth certificate, the homeschooling affidavit, and the notarized statement she'd filed under her changed name. She handed them over her hand, steady, her eyes unblinking. The woman took the papers and read through them carefully while the man made a call. Gerda listened as he recited her name, Dorothy's age, and the nature of the complaint. Every word felt like a needle. "There seems to be some inconsistency here," the woman finally said. "The birth certificate was filed 3 weeks after the child's birth, and there's no listed father. The guardian's identity, your identity only appears in records from the past 7 years. Before that, there's no digital footprint. That's highly unusual." Gerda didn't flinch. "I did what I had to do to protect her. She was born under complicated circumstances." "Complicated or not," the man replied, "we need to take temporary custody until this is clarified. You can petition for a hearing, but for now the child needs to come with us." The air thickened. Gerda felt like her body was sinking into the floor. "She doesn't even know anyone else," she said quietly. "She thinks I'm her mother." "That's not for us to decide," the woman said. "Our job is to ensure legal compliance." Gerda reached for her phone and dialed. Nathan answered on the second ring. "They're here," she said, her voice barely audible. "CPS. They want to take her." "What?" His voice sharpened. "I didn't authorize anything like that. I'm coming now." He arrived 15 minutes later, breathless, in a suit jacket that was half off his shoulder and a look that could cut glass. He flashed his ID to the agents, introduced himself as Dorothy's biological father, and requested clarification. The woman agent raised an eyebrow. "There's no father listed on record. If you want to assert paternity, you'll have to submit formal documents and undergo a hearing." "She's my daughter," Nathan said, keeping his voice steady. "And I will do whatever I need to make that official. But right now, I am telling you that removing her from this home without immediate cause is trauma you can't undo." The male agent didn't blink. "We don't make those calls. We follow procedure." Nathan turned to Gerda, but she was looking at him differently now. Her jaw tightened, eyes hard. "Did you do this?" she asked, low and sharp. "What?" Nathan blinked. "No. Gerda, I would never. This feels too clean," she said, voice rising. "Too fast. You come asking questions. Now CPS shows up. I trusted you. I didn't make this call," he said, taking a step forward. "I swear to you. I'm trying to fix this, not tear it apart." Dorothy had reemerged from her room, hugging a stuffed animal, her face pale with confusion. "Mom," she whispered. Gerda dropped to her knees and held her. "You're going to go with them for a little while, sweet girl. But I'll be right behind you. I promise." Dorothy clung to her tightly, not crying, but breathing fast, shallow, panicked. One of the agents gently reached for her hand. Gerda didn't resist. Nathan stood beside them, helpless. As they walked Dorothy out to the car, Nathan noticed one of the neighbors standing across the street, arms folded, watching. Judging. The woman muttered something under her breath to another neighbor. He couldn't hear it, but he didn't need to. The tone was enough. The implication was clear. "You know what they see," Gerda said quietly, her voice tight. "A white man showing up late and a black woman who raised a child that doesn't look exactly like her." Nathan didn't respond. He couldn't, because she was right. That was what they saw. And maybe that was what they were told to see. He walked her back into the house, every room feeling colder, emptier. "This is how they do it," she said. "They don't need proof. Just suspicion. Just the right phone call." Nathan sat down. He looked exhausted, gutted. "We'll get her back. I'll get a lawyer. We'll get paternity established. You'll file for guardianship, whatever it takes." Gerda shook her head. "They'll use everything against me. The name change, the missing years, the fact that I don't look like her. You don't understand. People like me don't get second chances when the system decides we're suspect." He reached for her hand and she let him take it. Her fingers were cold stiff, but she didn't pull away. "Then we do it together," he said. "Whatever it takes." The door remained open behind them, the echo of footsteps and clipped voices fading down the street. The home they had both tried to protect was no longer just vulnerable. It had been breached, and they had just learned that justice didn't always need a reason. Sometimes it just needed a target. The following morning began with a silence so tense it felt like the whole world had paused to see what would happen next. Nathan stood in the hallway of the modest legal office, hands buried in his pockets, jaw tight. Across from him, Gerda sat on a wooden bench, arms crossed over her chest, her expression unreadable. They hadn't spoken much since the CPS incident. Trust didn't return just because the storm had passed, but now there was something bigger at stake. Dorothy was still in state custody, and time was not their ally. Inside the office, Marlene Cook, an attorney in her 60s with a sharp voice and sharper instincts, was leafing through case folders. She wore no makeup and had a silver streak through her hair that made her look both intimidating and trustworthy. She didn't waste time. "You want to keep this child out of the system. You need to act like a family. Paperwork matters more than blood to these people. If you two are married, the state has far less grounds to interfere. You'll be considered a stable two-parent household." Gerda bristled. "You're saying I have to marry him so they won't steal her from me?" "No," Marlene said calmly. "I'm saying that without a legal tie between you two, the state can justify placing Dorothy somewhere else. Possibly with Nathan, possibly with someone from her late mother's side." She glanced at her notes like Senator Hartford. "And trust me, his lawyers are already circling." Nathan looked at Gerda. "You know I wouldn't let them take her." Gerda shot him a look. "You say that? But you didn't even know she existed until last week," Marlene cut in. "What matters now is how the court sees you both. Gerda, you're not legally recognized. You've been living under a new name. If CPS digs into that, they'll paint you as unstable, maybe even dangerous. Nathan, you're a potential biological father with means. That helps, but it also makes you a target. If you file separately, the system might hand Dorothy to you and cut Gerda out entirely. Do you want that?" "No," Nathan said without hesitation. "That's not an option." Marlene leaned forward. "Then you need to show them unity. Marriage isn't romantic here. It's protection. It's legal armor. And it might be the only way to keep Dorothy safe." Outside the window, the city moved indifferently, cars honking, pedestrians scrolling through their phones. But inside the room, time slowed. Gerda exhaled a slow breath full of fear and resignation. "So we do this. Just on paper," Marlene nodded. "Just on paper, but it needs to be done right away." An hour later, they stood in front of a civil clerk side by side but worlds apart. There were no rings, no vows, just a signature and two solemn witnesses, Daniel Reyes and Marlene herself. The clerk asked the usual questions in a flat tone, and neither of them hesitated. When it was over, Gerda's fingers trembled slightly as she accepted the certificate. Later outside the courthouse, Nathan turned to her. "I know this doesn't make us friends, but I promise you I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing it for her." Gerda nodded slowly. "I don't trust systems, but I trust what Dorothy needs." There was a pause, the kind that held everything unsaid. Then she added, softer, "Don't make me regret this." Nathan's voice was quiet. "I won't." As they walked away from the building, newly bonded by law, if not yet by faith, the air felt different. Gerda still kept her guard up. Nathan still questioned what else he didn't know. But for the first time, they were on the same side. And with Dorothy's future in the balance, that was the only side that mattered. Back in Marlene's office, she locked the marriage certificate in a secure file. She had seen plenty of odd unions, some fake, some desperate, many doomed. But something in her gut told her this one wasn't just a strategy. It was the first real stand two fractured adults had taken against a system that too often broke the people it claimed to protect. This wasn't about love. It was about war. A quiet, bureaucratic war for one little girl's right to stay with the only people who had ever fought for her. And in this kind of war, sometimes the strongest vow was the one never spoken aloud. Daniel Reyes had been through enough cold cases to know when the past was hiding in plain sight. He wasn't just chasing ghosts anymore. He was closing in on a man who had never once shown his face in the open, but had left footprints deep enough to follow. After Nathan and Gerda's rush courthouse wedding, the air between them still carried tension, but their unity had drawn a line in the sand. And Hartford, wherever he was watching from, had seen it. That made Daniel's work not just urgent, but dangerous. He wasn't just digging up the past. He was walking into the fire. He started with the apartment, the one Tiffany Clark had given birth in. It had taken days to triangulate its location using scraps from Eunice Jenkins' employment records, hospital proximity, and burner phone pings from 7 years ago. Most of it was guesswork, but guesswork sharpened by experience. A tip from a retired phone technician gave him the last piece, an old landline call routed through a public phone booth 3 blocks from a now-condemned tenement complex in Newark. Daniel parked outside the crumbling building just after dusk. The light was fading, and the city had already started to go quiet in this part of town. He walked up the warped steps, flashed a badge to the landlord, even though it wasn't real, and asked if anyone remembered 2 women, one pregnant, one quiet, and both clearly scared, renting a one-room unit under the table about 7 years ago. The landlord, a man in his 60s with nicotine-stained fingers and a voice like gravel, squinted at the photo of Tiffany. He leaned back in his folding chair, scratched the back of his neck, and said, "Yeah, I remember her. Looked too young to be having a baby. Friend never smiled. They paid cash, never caused trouble. One night, though, real late, a guy showed up. Looked like trouble in a suit. Thought he was a cop or lawyer or something. Knocked real hard. Didn't stay long." Daniel's pulse picked up. He pulled out his phone, scrolled to a photo, and turned it toward the man. Was it him? It was a still from a charity gala 6 years ago. Reed Milton stood just behind Senator Hartford, chin slightly dipped, hands clasped, eyes cold. The landlord didn't hesitate. "That's the guy. I don't forget faces like that." Outside, Daniel called Nathan immediately. His voice was low, urgent. Reed was there, Nathan. The night Tiffany died. He found the apartment. He was inside. Nathan didn't speak at first. When he did, it was slow clipped. "You're sure?" "Eyewitness confirmed. I also checked vehicle logs. Back then, Hartford's office used a private fleet management system for security. I traced one car, Reed's assigned vehicle, registered near the same address at 2:14 a.m. That timestamp is the same window." Gerda said Tiffany started bleeding. Nathan's jaw clenched hard. So he didn't just find her. He saw her dying. Maybe worse. Daniel nodded to himself. And he never reported it. Never called for help. Didn't even appear in any records. That means he wasn't sent to save her. He was there to finish the job. The silence on the other end grew dense. Daniel continued, his voice now edged with anger. "I also pulled police call logs from that block the week Tiffany died. No 911 calls. No EMS. Not even a noise complaint. It's like she never existed. And that's exactly what someone wanted." Nathan sat in his car outside Dorothy's temporary foster home, his hands gripping the wheel like it was the only thing keeping him from exploding. His thoughts swirled. Reed had found Tiffany. Reed had left her to die, or worse, insured it, and Hartford had known. "This changes everything," Nathan muttered. "It's not just about finding Tiffany's killer, it's about exposing a cover-up." Daniel agreed. "And Hartford's already shifting the narrative. His people just sent a statement to a local paper. He's claiming to be Dorothy's grandfather. Says he was unaware of her existence, but he's heartbroken to find out his daughter may have died in secret. Says he'll do anything to protect her." Nathan let out a bitter laugh. "He's setting the stage. If this goes public now and we don't have Reed, don't have proof, Hartford gets to play grieving patriarch." "Exactly," Daniel said. "We need Reed, and we need him cornered. I've got a lead. He's still in state. Quiet, but not gone. Give me 48 hours. Nathan ended the call and stared at the dark sky. The system that had buried Tiffany was waking up again. And this time, it wanted her daughter. But if they wanted a fight, they had picked the wrong man to underestimate. The first headline dropped at 6:40 a.m., just as the city was starting to shake off the weight of sleep. By 7, it was trending. By 9, it was everywhere. Cable news loops, Twitter threads, Facebook moms groups, even podcast banter. The language was careful, but vicious, the tone polished with just enough moral outrage to sound concerned, not accusatory. Unanswered questions in Tiffany Clark's disappearance resurfaced tech tycoon, linked to nurse with secret past. Beneath that, a grainy photo of Nathan walking into Edna's diner next to an old staff badge of Eunice Jenkins. Gerda. The internet wasted no time connecting dots it didn't understand. Blogs resurfaced Tiffany's old university photos. An anonymous Reddit thread claimed to have known her as a quiet but brilliant black student who went missing after getting involved with someone powerful. By mid-morning, the most shared clip was a local anchor stating with grave seriousness, "There are whispers, just whispers for now, that Tiffany Clark may have died under suspicious circumstances and that those closest to her child had reason to conceal the truth." Nathan stood in his office watching it unfold with the kind of stillness that didn't come from calm, but restraint. His jaw was tight, his coffee untouched. Miranda entered without knocking, tablet in hand, face pale and grim. "They're going full smear." The story was picked up by New York Ledger, syndicated through 5 affiliates already. She tapped the screen. "They're calling it a conspiracy to erase Tiffany. There's even one piece suggesting Gerda posed as her to secure benefits." Nathan closed his eyes briefly, breathing through his nose. "That's impossible. There were no benefits." Miranda didn't flinch. "Doesn't matter. It's a headline now." Downstairs, Gerda was fielding the first wave of reporters who had found her building. Someone had already slapped a photocopied flyer of her mugshot from 2 decades ago on the mailbox. She stared at it for a long moment, lips tight, then peeled it off slowly and crumpled it into her coat pocket. Inside, the apartment felt suddenly unfamiliar, cold, smaller, like it no longer belonged to safety. She sat at the edge of the couch, knees stiff, watching the news cycle crawl like a flood she couldn't hold back. Dorothy's school had called. She was being kept under observation for her well-being. Gerda hadn't cried. She hadn't screamed. She had simply gone very, very quiet. Nathan arrived late afternoon, face flushed from a string of tense meetings. He didn't knock. She didn't rise. "They're framing us," he said. She nodded. "I saw. We have to go public. Show our side." Gerda looked up at him slowly. Her voice was calm but brittle. "Our side doesn't matter if the world already decided who the villains are." He sat beside her, close but not touching. "We're not villains." "Not to her," she said, "but they don't see her. They see scandal. They see a black woman with a changed name, a white billionaire who didn't know he had a child, and a mother who vanished." Nathan exhaled. "I spoke to Daniel. He thinks this isn't organic. It was planted." "Of course it was." Her voice sharpened. "Hartford." As if summoned, Senator Harold Hartford appeared on the evening news an hour later. Hair immaculate tie, navy blue demeanor, mournful. He spoke from behind a wooden lectern with a backdrop of the American flag and a children's hospital. "I only learned recently," he began, "that my late daughter, Tiffany Clark, may have passed without my knowledge, and more disturbingly that a child may have been born and concealed from both me and the public." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "I loved my daughter. I failed her. But I will not fail my granddaughter." The next line was the one that exploded across social media. "I am requesting emergency guardianship of Dorothy Clark to ensure her safety and provide her with the family stability that was denied to Tiffany." The world applauded. Talk shows framed it as redemption. Newspapers called it an American tragedy with a moral core. But inside Nathan's apartment, it felt like a declaration of war. He watched the broadcast with a fist clenched against his leg. Gerda didn't speak. She was watching the senator's eyes, not the grief, not the polish, but the calculation behind them. "He's framing himself as a victim," she said finally. "He knows he can't silence us with money, so he's using the public." Nathan stood. "We won't let him win." She looked at him, tired but clear. "He already has the mic. We need more than outrage. We need proof." Daniel called the next morning. With a voice sharper than usual, Reed's name came up again. "I tracked an old burner number used in secure comms out of Hartford's office. One ping places it 3 blocks from that apartment the night Tiffany died." Nathan went still. "You can prove it was Reed working on it, but if this gets out now, they'll spin it. Say he was checking on her safety. That he was sent by a worried grandfather." Nathan's voice dropped. "Unless we catch him saying otherwise." Daniel was quiet for a beat. "That's the play. I'm working contacts. If we get the recording, we flip the board." But Hartford wasn't waiting. By that afternoon, he had filed an emergency custody motion in family court. The language was sanitized legal, but the intent was crystal clear. He was moving to take Dorothy, legally, permanently, on grounds of instability, emotional danger, and unfit guardianship. Attached was a dossier full of curated headlines, carefully selected screenshots, and out-of-context emails. Gerda's past, Nathan's previous NDA with Tiffany, even a doctored voicemail that painted him as coercive. What made things worse was that someone, maybe Hartford, maybe an opportunistic blogger, had unearthed their rushed civil marriage certificate from 2 weeks ago, a union made not of romance but strategy. Headlines began suggesting ulterior motives. Tycoon marries former nurse in sudden move to block grandfather's custody bid. Talk shows debated the ethics. Pundits used it to paint Nathan as manipulative, Gerda as complicit. One segment even speculated the marriage had been forged to bury shared guilt. The ceremony, held quietly in a courthouse with no family present, now looked like a cover-up in the public eye. It only added fuel to Hartford's narrative that he was the only adult seeking to protect Dorothy out of true love and moral responsibility. Nathan paced the apartment like a caged animal. Gerda didn't move from the table where she sat, reading the court papers line by line, eyes dry but burning. "They'll listen to him," she said. "He's everything the court trusts. Old, white, polished, grieving. We're noise to them." Nathan sat across from her, voice cracking. "I won't let him take her, I swear to you." Gerda finally looked up. "Then you need to stop playing defense." Her hand slid a small notebook across the table. Inside were notes, names, a timeline. "I wrote everything down. From the day I met Tiffany to the day she died. Every name I remember, every threat, every night I thought someone was outside our door." Nathan opened it slowly. The handwriting was tight, angular, the truth in ink. "We go on record," she said. "We name names. We show them what happened. Not to shock, to survive." And in that moment, surrounded by noise they hadn't made, facing a man who shaped reality to suit power, they did the only thing they could. They prepared to speak. With facts, with names, with proof, because stories win hearts, but evidence wins custody. The warehouse sat on the edge of the old rail yard, cloaked in rust and silence. Daniel parked a block away. They had to walk the last stretch, mud-slick gravel crunching beneath their shoes, a stale wind stirring the dangling tin panels above. Nathan hadn't spoken since they left the courthouse, not since the emergency hearing ended with the judge saying she'd take Hartford's petition under advisement. A tight window, the judge had called it. 48 hours, maybe less. But Nathan didn't care about legal language anymore. He wanted the truth, needed it in blood and breath, not papers and speculation. This was about Tiffany now, and the truth behind what had broken her. Daniel knocked once against the corrugated steel door. Then again. Reed didn't answer with words. He just appeared, his steps slow, measured. His clothes were worn, unbuttoned at the wrist. The man looked tired in the way fugitives look tired, like someone running on fear and bad choices. When he saw Nathan behind Daniel, his expression barely moved. Only the twitch at the edge of his jaw showed he'd expected someone else. "I'll be honest," Reed muttered. "Didn't think you'd be the first to find me. Thought it'd be Hartford." Nathan stepped forward. His voice was gravel low and strained. "You were there. That night, when she died." Reed nodded once, then turned and walked deeper into the warehouse. They followed. "I didn't kill her," he said before either of them could ask again. "But I didn't save her either." Daniel turned on the small audio recorder in his pocket. No click, no beep. Just a quiet start to something that would become very loud later. Reed leaned against a rusted steel beam, his arms crossed. Hartford gave the order. He said Tiffany had defied him. She was supposed to terminate the pregnancy. She refused. Then she vanished. Said she'd been radicalized by the nurse. That's what he called it, like she was diseased. He said she was a threat to the family, to the party. He didn't want a black grandchild tied to his name. I was supposed to find her. Shut it down. Quietly. Nathan's hands shook. He clenched his fists at his sides, nails digging into palms. So you followed her. Found the apartment. Reed nodded. Gerda Eunice was smart. Covered her tracks well. But not good enough. We caught a welfare report flagged by a local nurse who checked in on Tiffany weeks prior. Someone who recognized her photo. That's how we found the place. By the time I got there, it was already done. She was lying on a mattress. No sheets. Blood soaked through it. She was cold, clammy. Her lips were cracked. I don't even think she knew where she was. He paused. Cleared his throat. Gerda was outside. She was washing cloth diapers in a bucket. Didn't even see me go in. I stood over Tiffany, and his voice hitched. She looked up at me like she'd seen the devil. She knew why I was there. She didn't plead for herself. She didn't ask why. She just whispered, "Please. Her name will be Dorothy. Don't let them take her." Nathan dropped his gaze. His lungs refused to pull in air. His chest felt hollow, like everything inside had been scraped out. Reed continued softer now. I don't know why I didn't do it. I'd done worse. But she was so small, so broken. I saw the baby swaddled in a shirt nearby, not crying, barely breathing. I told Tiffany I wasn't going to touch the baby. She tried to thank me, I think. Her voice was gone. Then I just walked out, left her there. Daniel asked, "Did you call anyone?" No, Reed said. I didn't call for help. I didn't call Hartford. I didn't want my name in it anymore. I let her die. Slowly. She might have made it to morning if I'd called someone. But I didn't. Nathan took one long step forward. You stood there and let her bleed to death. Reed looked him dead in the eyes. Yes. The room went silent, long enough for the warehouse to creak in protest. Reed took a breath and added, I disappeared after that. New name, new city, burned everything. Thought it was over. But when you started digging, when you started asking about Dorothy, Hartford figured out the girl was still alive. That's when he came for me. He wanted to know why I hadn't finished the job. And now, Daniel asked. Reed chuckled bitterly. Now I'm expendable. So congratulations, gentlemen. You got the story. You want to be heroes. Use it. Make him pay. Daniel stopped the recorder. Reed looked away. Nathan didn't move. He just stared at the wall, then back to Reed. Tiffany trusted me. She loved me. And I let her walk into hell alone. She died thinking no one would protect her baby. You left her. But I buried her. Every day for 7 years, I've been burying her with silence and guilt. Now I know the truth. And it burns more than the lies ever did. Reed gave no answer, just turned and walked into the dark. Later, as they drove away, Nathan sat in silence, one hand clenched around the recorder so tight his knuckles went white. She said her name would be Dorothy, he whispered, as if the words themselves could bring her back. Daniel nodded, eyes on the road, and now the world's going to know. Nathan didn't respond. He was staring through the windshield like it was a tunnel back in time. He saw Tiffany's eyes, heard her voice, and knew what he had to do, not just for Dorothy, not just for justice, but for a promise broken too long ago, one he intended to keep now no matter what it cost. The rosewood grand ballroom glittered under chandeliers so large they seemed to hang from heaven. Dozens of tables draped in cream silk lined the space, surrounded by donors, politicians, and photographers in sleek black suits and polite expressions. The banners above read, Family First, a celebration of love and legacy. At the center, the guest of honor, Senator Harold Hartford, stood tall at a podium flanked by red, white, and blue. His voice, smooth as polished stone, carried through the speakers with just the right blend of grief and pride. Tonight, he said, pausing for effect, we welcome home a child who has lost a girl hidden from her birthright, her family, and the love she so rightly deserved. Dorothy Clark is here not as a controversy, but as a granddaughter, and this gathering is not about politics, but healing. The crowd applauded on cue. Cameras flashed as Dorothy was guided onto the stage wearing a powder blue dress and a stiff, uncertain smile. She glanced around the room full of strangers, eyes searching for someone who wasn't there. Senator Hartford placed a hand on her shoulder, smiling at the press. He leaned in and whispered something to her, and though his face never changed, Dorothy's expression faltered, just for a moment, just long enough. Outside, Nathan stood with Gerda and Daniel beside the service entrance. Their credentials forged their plan exact. Nathan's hands were sweating. His heart wasn't racing. It was pounding, deafening in his chest like a countdown he couldn't pause. Gerda was still, her eyes focused, her breathing measured. She had seen rooms like this before, rooms that smiled while they erased people. Daniel checked the live stream connection on his phone one last time, then nodded. "We have one shot at this," he said. "If the feed drops, we lose control." Nathan said nothing. His eyes were on the glass doors, just beyond which stood the man who'd ordered Tiffany's death and rewritten the past as campaign poetry. The man who now claimed her daughter. A staffer opened the door to step out for a cigarette. Nathan caught it with one foot and slid through. Gerda followed. Daniel moved like shadow. Inside, the senator's speech moved toward its finale. "Family is not always perfect," Hartford said, "but it is sacred, and when we fail our children, we owe them the effort to make it right. Tonight is about redemption." Nathan stepped into the light. "Then let's talk about what redemption really costs." The room froze. Dozens of heads turned. A whisper. Then silence. Security moved quickly, but Daniel lifted the phone high. "We're live," he called. "Every second you try to stop this is a second the world sees your panic." Nathan moved to the foot of the stage, eyes locked on Hartford. "You buried Tiffany Clark. You paid to erase her. You called her unstable. You lied about her death, and you ordered a man to end both her and her baby." Dorothy looked down sharply. Hartford kept smiling. "This is nonsense," Hartford said, raising his hands for calm. "This man is not well." Daniel stepped forward. "Then let's hear someone else speak." He tapped his screen. The ballroom speakers crackled. Then came Reed's voice, gravelly, measured, undeniable. Hartford gave the order, said she was a threat to the family, told me to shut it down, quietly. Her and the baby. I didn't kill her, but I let her die. I left her bleeding. And now he wants to erase the only thing she left behind. Again. Gasps rippled through the room. One woman stood up, hand over mouth. A man near the front dropped his wineglass. Gerda stepped beside Nathan. Her voice calm but sharp enough to cut through marble said, "You said Tiffany was unstable, that I forged documents, that Dorothy was a lie. But we brought you the truth. On tape, in writing, in blood." Daniel walked to a nearby display table and unfolded a folder under the camera lights. "Here's the audio confession from Reed Milton, the man you sent to clean up your daughter's mistake. You all just heard him admit to it." And here he held up a bound file, are scanned pages from Tiffany's personal journal, written in her own hand, dated the week before she died. She knew they were coming. She begged Gerda to protect her baby. Gerda held up a small, worn notebook, pages frayed at the edges. This was Tiffany's. She wrote everything down, every threat, every fear, every name. And in the back, she said, opening to a page, she wrote this: "If they ever find me, promise me, Dorothy will never carry their name." Daniel added, and these, gesturing to another folder, are medical records pulled from Woodmere Psychiatric, where Tiffany was confined against her will under a false identity. Admissions forms signed by an aide of Senator Hartford, medications prescribed, restraint orders issued, all under silence and coercion. The crowd began shifting. Reporters snapped photos. An aide whispered frantically into a phone. Hartford's lips tightened. Dorothy stepped down from the stage. Slowly, quietly. She walked to Gerda, looked up at her. "Can we go home now?" Gerda's voice cracked. "Yes, baby. We're going home." Nathan's knees nearly buckled, but he caught himself. He looked at Hartford one last time. No longer a man of stature, but a relic of control unraveling in real time. Cameras swarmed. Voices rose. But Nathan, Gerda, and Dorothy slipped out the side door, not running, not hiding, just walking. Together. And as the door shut behind them, the live stream still rolling, the crowd inside erupted not with applause, but with questions that could no longer be silenced. Outside, under the soft night sky, Nathan held Dorothy's hand as she held Gerda's. He looked at them both, then forward again. Redemption didn't come from a podium. It came from the truth, and from a child who had waited long enough to be heard. It was a warm spring morning in the town of Marigold Pines, the kind of town where neighbors still waved from porches and the smell of fresh bread wafted from bakeries that opened before sunrise. Life here moved slower, with no cameras, no headlines, and no spotlights waiting to expose the quiet corners people built to recover. The cafe sat on a sleepy corner across from the elementary school, and the bell above the door jingled lightly as Dorothy Clark, now 8, stepped inside with a $5 bill clutched in one hand and a book bag bouncing at her side. She was wearing a green hoodie, her curls pulled into a ponytail, and her eyes scanned the pastry case with surgical focus. Behind her, Nathan and Gerda watched from a small table in the corner, both nursing mugs of tea. Nathan, in a wool cardigan, leaned back with a book open but unread. Gerda had a paper from the library spread beside her cup, one hand absently resting on her cheek. They weren't guarding Dorothy like bodyguards anymore. They were just parents, still learning how to relax, still startled by silence, but healing. Dorothy approached the counter just as an older woman in a floral scarf patted her pockets, her brow furrowed in frustration. "I swear I had my wallet," the woman said softly to the cashier, who smiled apologetically. Dorothy looked up. "Excuse me," she said, pulling the bill from her hoodie. "Can I use this to help her pay? I just want a muffin." "We can split it." The woman blinked down at her. A moment passed. Then she laughed. "You don't have to do that, sweetheart." "I want to," Dorothy said simply. "My mom always says if you can help, you should, even with muffins." Nathan froze for just a breath. That same gesture, that same spark, for a second time rewound to Ridgeway Cafe. But this time the air didn't collapse. This time there was no ghost rising from the past, no blood-soaked history clinging to the walls, just a child being kind and a father watching her live. When they stepped back outside, the sun was already lifting through the trees. Dorothy skipped ahead, her shoes tapping the sidewalk like a rhythm she made up on the spot. "I forgot to ask," she called back to Nathan and Gerda, "can I show Mia the box after school?" Gerda looked at Nathan, who gave a soft nod. "Sure," Gerda said, "but just be careful with it. That box is old. It meant a lot to your mom." At home, tucked safely in a small chest inside Dorothy's room, sat the Tiffany box. Handmade cedar, hinges a bit rusty. Inside were the fragments of a life never fully lived, a photograph of Tiffany pregnant barefoot in a summer dress smiling into the sun, a ceramic coffee cup once shattered, now lovingly glued back together by Gerda over 3 evenings at the kitchen table, a baby sock still soft with time. And at the bottom, wrapped in a folded envelope, the final piece, Tiffany's last letter. It was never mailed. Nathan found it folded inside a novel of Baldwin's that had been packed among her belongings, addressed simply, "To my daughter." Dorothy had read it only once a few months back. She'd asked Nathan to read it aloud, and he had. Every word, even when his voice trembled, even when Gerda sat down beside them and placed a hand over his, even when Dorothy cried without knowing if the tears came from loss or from finally being seen. Now the letter stayed in the box, unread but known. Dorothy didn't need to open it again to remember what it said. She carried it with her, its weight, its truth, its ache. Nathan had started writing too. Not a memoir, not revenge, just pages, observations, memories, things he wanted Dorothy to know when she grew up, the kind of man he'd been, the kind of man he hoped to be now, the kind of love that doesn't come easy but never leaves. Gerda worked 2 mornings a week at the library and spent afternoons in the garden. She was calmer now, her eyes less shielded, her steps less careful, but she still kept a copy of Tiffany's journal in her nightstand drawer, pages dog-eared and ink-faded. Some wounds never vanish, but they lose their sharpness when no longer hidden. That evening, after homework and dinner and the nightly arguments about brushing teeth properly, Nathan walked into Dorothy's room and sat beside her bed. She was cradling the Tiffany box on her lap, her small fingers tracing the etched initials on the lid. "Daddy," she said, "what was Mommy afraid of the most?" Nathan didn't answer right away. He looked at her, this child of stubborn light and quiet strength, and tried to steady the lump in his throat. "She was afraid," he said slowly, "that you'd grow up not knowing how deeply you were loved, that no one would ever tell you the truth about her, or about you." Dorothy was quiet. She reached inside the box and took out the photograph, held it up to the bedside lamp. "Do you think she'd like me?" Nathan smiled. His heart ached in ways it had never healed, but the smile was real. "She would be proud of you. So proud she wouldn't have words for it." Dorothy set the photo down, climbed under the blankets. She didn't ask more questions. She didn't need to. Nathan tucked the Tiffany box back on the shelf, turned off the light, and stood in the doorway for a moment, watching. Outside the window, the wind rustled the trees. No sirens, no headlines, Just a little girl sleeping soundly. A mother remembered, and a story that didn't end in tragedy but in choice. A life rewritten, not to erase what came before, but to honor it. And in the soft hush of that quiet house, something long fractured finally felt whole again. Thank you for staying with us all the way to the end. Maybe this wasn't just a story about injustice or redemption. Maybe it was about something deeper, like how truth demands courage, how love can take many forms, and how healing begins with someone finally being believed. If this story moved something in you even just a little, we're deeply grateful. Your presence, your time, your heart, it all matters. We don't know where you're watching from, maybe a quiet room, maybe a crowded train, maybe somewhere far from home. But wherever you are, you're part of this moment now. And that means everything to us. So if you feel something, sadness, hope, anger, or a quiet kind of peace, tell us. Let it out in the comments. We'd love to hear what part of this story stayed with you. And if you want more stories like this ones that don't look away, ones that listen, go ahead and subscribe, and help us keep telling them. It means the world. From our small team to your screen, thank you for being here, for caring, for remembering that every child deserves to be safe, that truth deserves to be heard, and that sometimes healing begins with a single act of kindness. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, stay kind, stay brave. You're not alone.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.